At the ball, everyone laughed. When the prince introduced a peasant girl as his bride, but when candles burned high in the chandeliers, 100 flames reflected in crystal like captive stars. The parquet shone under wax and footsteps. Powdered heads nodded, jewels answered light with light, and the music of a minuet folded in the air like ribbon just before it was cut. She stood one pace behind the prince, a simple muslin gown falling straight to her ankles, a single wildflower pinned low at the nape of her neck. Her hands were steady, her breath was quiet. She had come from fields where morning started long before the sun bothered to show, and where a straight back made a day go faster. That habit did not desert her now. She heard the hush before it happened. She felt the room lean toward him. The prince lifted his chin and lifted her with the motion. His voice carried without strain. It was not loud. It did not need to be. "Allow me to present my intended." Silence fell cleanly, the sort that a court can produce like a handkerchief drawn from a sleeve. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the sound of a bow slipping on a string as the orchestra's leader checked his grip. Then a laugh cracked somewhere high in the galleries. Another answered it, like crystal answering crystal, and the hush broke into ripples. Fans snapped open. A gentleman's quizzing glass rose like an accusation. Words, not yet decided into sentences, clustered at the edges of mouths. She kept her gaze ahead. She did not stare at the floor. She did not hunt for a face that might be kind. She felt the prince's sleeve near her knuckles. He did not move away. "Is this a jest?" someone murmured from behind a feathered fan. "It must be a jest," another replied, relief making the sentence a little too quick. The Lord Chamberlain stepped forward 2 inches, then paused with his staff by his side. He wore silk embroidered in gold thread and the court's schedule in his head. A lifetime of order told him what should happen next, and nothing in that script matched what stood on the dais. He glanced at the master of ceremonies, who in turn looked at the orchestra. The bows did not rise. The hall held its breath and did not know where to place it. She let her eyes settle on the far stateroom door where servants had been slipping in and out with trays of spiced wine. The faint smell of orange clung to the air, mixed with beeswax and the ghost scent of hair powder. People watched her, weighed her, examined the weave of her dress, the way hands test cloth at a stall. A lady's mouth tilted in a smile that did not reach her eyes. A young man tucked his chin into his cravat and whispered to his neighbor. Laughter, a little bolder now, fed itself. She did not waver. Her thoughts were plain and slow so they would not run away. If they would laugh, let them. If they would turn their backs, let them. Let the floor be as slick as a mill's plank, and let the air be as heavy as August. She would not bend first. "Say the word," the prince said, low, his mouth almost still. She heard the steadiness under it. She heard the risk too. She answered without turning her head. "Only say yours." The orchestra leader cleared his throat, unsure, and lifted his bow to attempt a passage that might vanish the matter under notes. The prince's hand shifted in a gesture that looked like nothing more than a nod for music, yet it tightened the circle around them. The first violinist drew a line of sound that quivered, then steadied. It might have worked if the room had wanted it. The room did not. The Duke began to move. He did not thrust or hurry. He did not need to. He was a man whose name opened corridors and settled arguments before they began. He parted the crowd with the easy attention he had earned and cultivated for 2 decades. He looked every inch what he was, broad-shouldered, fitted coat, a gloved hand that could make courtesy into a weapon simply by how it held and released. As he advanced, faces softened into welcome and then into anticipation. If anyone could correct this misstep without a raised voice, it would be him. Fortune, in that room, bent toward him by habit. He reached the dais and bowed with careful exactitude. The angle was correct. The time held just long enough to show respect without surrender. His eyes lifted to the prince's, then to hers, then back. "For the honor of the evening," he said, calm. Permit me to make a small adjustment to the order of presentation. There has been a confusion. A confusion. The word floated, generous and poisonous at once. The prince did not yield an inch. He did not do the duke the discourtesy of anger. He stood as if standing were a decision he would make again and again. She felt the heat of his sleeve like a small fire to one side. "Order begins at the head of the set," he said. "We are precisely where we need to be." There was nothing in his tone that drew a sword. It did not need one. The Lord Chamberlain's staff shifted in his hand. His eyes ticked to the side where the guards stood by the great doors, unmoving, ornamental, until called upon. He did not call yet. He looked instead to the master of ceremonies, who shrank within his dignity, and then to the prince, who offered no path out. She understood the edges of the moment. It was a thing with teeth, and it would bite someone. She watched a young footman near the wall go pale and steady himself with a finger on the paneling. His gaze slipped to the wildflower at her nape, and stayed there as if holding to green were safety. "Will you dance?" the prince asked, audibly now, not as a man begging the room but as a man speaking to one person inside it. "We both know this is no dance," she answered, her voice clear enough for those nearest to hear and soft enough for the rest to wonder. A patch of whispers broke at that, fast as struck tinder. Who taught her to answer like that? No one who wants peace in this house. The Duke's mouth tightened. He had the gift of bringing a crowd along with him by making them feel as though they had arrived there first. He turned slightly, letting the assembly see his profile, and spoke without moving his hands. "Your Highness," he said, smooth, "the dignity of the court is a delicate thing. It does not thrive on surprise." "Some dignities are larger than that," the prince said. "Then allow me to protect both." A pause opened, and she felt it, as one feels a crack open under the weight of a cart. The master of ceremonies took a step forward, drew the breath that announces a proclamation, then let it out. He had seen the Duke's hand move before, and knew, as many did, how often the Duke's suggestions entered the world, disguised as inevitabilities. Her muscles tightened without moving. She let her gaze fall for one instant to the polished floor at the edge of the dais. The carved step cast a thin shadow, a line of darkness crisp as a rule. If she shifted wrong, if her heel caught, she would provide the room the stumble it desired. She made her weight a measure. The prince's fingers twitched as if to offer his hand, and then stopped. He had the habit of restraint that comes from years of being watched. That restraint had the opposite effect now. It made the wish to close the gap between them almost visible in the air. "Let the musicians play," the Duke said, not raising his voice. "There are rules that keep us from confusion. We can honor those and preserve the evening." A gentleman somewhere laughed again, this time with relief, as if the Duke had given everyone permission to stand down from alarm. A lady adjusted her necklace. Diamonds corrected their alignment under her fingers. The first violinist looked at the prince, then at the Lord Chamberlain, then at the Duke. His bow hovered uncertain. She did not move. She felt her pulse at her wrists and along the back of her throat. Surrounding faces blurred into light and fabric. What was close was the timber frame of the dais under her feet, and the slight warmth from the prince's sleeve, and the small stiffness of the dress's seams where her own hands had stitched them. She had not imagined the court's game would be kind. She had not expected it to be this bright. "Tell me if you regret it," she said, not looking at him. "I chose a thing that does not belong to them," he said. "Then keep it." She wondered if the words were foolish. She wondered if the room would catch them and twist them into something else. She could not withdraw them now. The Lord Chamberlain lifted his staff a measure. The guards at the doors did not move. Their halberds gleamed like cold river water under stars. Behind the ripple of lace and brocade, the Queen's ladies shifted along the wall like a pale tide, faces composed into their trained blankness. The room leaned to hear a command that would shape the next breath. Something small and metal slipped from the inside of her cuff. She felt the brush of it against her skin, the dread weight of a thing letting go. It fell without a sound at first, then struck the floor with a soft, ridiculous ring that carried farther than it had any right to. A tiny oval, its hinge long accustomed to fingers, spun once and wobbled flat near the carved edge of the step. The footman who had fixed his eyes on the wildflower flinched. His gaze dropped to the oval, widened, then shot up to the Duke. He was already looking. The Duke did not need to feign surprise. The little object summoned it on its own. He let the shock cross his face in a measured degree, just enough to allow the room to follow his attention without thinking itself led. A gloved hand lifted, elegant, relaxed. He did not bend. He merely extended his fingers, as if collecting a mislaid pin for the sake of order. The prince's weight shifted, the smallest transfer that meant he would move if movement became necessary. He did not take his eyes off the Duke's hand. She stared at the oval and felt a scar of panic run across her ribs and vanish. She had never before been so grateful for a stitch she had taken 2 days ago, securing the lining of her sleeve. Had the seam been a thread looser, the object might have fallen among dancers and been kicked into shadow with a careless foot, lost to this bright room's hunger. The master of ceremonies raised his head like a hound scenting wind. This was a change in the pattern he could interpret into order. He opened his mouth to speak. The Lord Chamberlain beat him to it. "Hold," he said, not loudly, but with a trained voice that expected obedience. The orchestra ceased to breathe. The rustle of silk dwindled into nothing. Somewhere a candle sputtered and caught its breath again. The smell of beeswax thickened. "Your Grace," the Lord Chamberlain continued, addressing the Duke with full courtesy, "permit the object to be set upon the table." "Of course," the Duke said, the words like cream, and did not lower his hand. She found that she could see the tiny scratches on the oval's surface from where she stood, a record of years and clumsy fingers. The gilding had worn away on the edges. The hinge showed a grey that honest metal shows when rubbed by worry. She had handled it in dark rooms, and in rooms that smelled of bread and soap, avoided it in rooms where other eyes moved too quickly. It lay now in a flood of candlelight that admitted no shadow. She felt the prince lean by a breath, and then still himself. He gave the impression of still water with a strong current beneath. She had the sense that if she moved toward the oval, he would move forward too. If she did not, he would not risk her balance on the edge of the dais. The choice coiled between them. A court can read a line of ink on a page taken from a great book across the room. It can read a choice made by 2 people on the field of a hand's width. "Highness," the Duke said, and now the silk on his voice began to tighten. "Permit me." "Do not," the prince said. The word was not loud. It had weight. It rolled to the far corners of the room and settled there like a stone in water. The master of ceremonies looked to the Lord Chamberlain, who looked to the guards. A decision had to be made, and fast, and in a way that could be written down afterward, as though it had been simple. The guards took 1 step, perhaps 2, then stopped again under the lifted staff like dancers awaiting the next figure. They had moved enough to make metal whisper against itself. The Duke's gloved fingers hovered above the oval. They did not shake. He had long practice in holding the edge of a thing without touching it. He could wait. Waiting in public is a form of pressure. "Do you believe me?" she said, almost too quietly for anyone but the prince to hear. "Or do you believe them?" "I know what I am doing," he said. "What am I?" "Mine to protect." He stepped down from the raised floor so that his shoes stood on the same level as hers. The motion cut through the room like a knife through pavlova, quiet but devastating for the structure. To step off the dais was to say a great many things without saying any of them, and those who had been trained from birth in such grammar heard a sentence they would remember in the morning and pretend to have always known. The young footman stared at the wildflower, then at the oval again, as if one explained the other. He looked as though he might be sick and steadfast at the same time. The Queen's ladies exchanged glances so minute that only other ladies could have seen them. One adjusted the fall of her sleeve. One fixed the ribbon of her fan. "Restore the figure," the master of ceremonies said. Too late, and to no one in particular. There would be no figure restored while a question lay on the floor. She felt the carved line of the step at her heel, and did not let her weight drift. She bit the inside of her lip once, and released it before it could hurt. She tasted beeswax and the hot edge of too many candles. The Duke lowered his hand another fraction, the room's light gathering on the smooth leather. "Enough," the Lord Chamberlain said, deciding for someone, perhaps for everyone. He lifted his staff and turned his head to the door. "Guards." Halberds moved. The sound of boot heels came soft and even over the polished floor. It was not a sound intended to frighten. It was meant to reassure. In that moment it did neither. She did not flinch. She watched the steel approach, the light along its edges as thin as a song's high note. The prince turned his head a degree and watched too, the same light cutting his profile into a sharper line. The Duke did not look at the guards. He kept his eyes on the oval, as if the world contained only that and his hand. A hush fell so complete that even the candles seemed to hold their flames lower to listen. The orchestra men stood with bows mid-air, wrists stiffening. The first violinist swallowed. The guard at the front stopped at the base of the dais. His halberd caught and held a bright thread of fire from the chandeliers. He did not speak. He did not need to. The Duke's hand poised above the little oval, a breath away. All at once, every gaze belonged to that inch of space. Steel flashed, leather hovered, and no one in the room, not even the prince, could predict whose will would rule the next second. The air broke under the weight of a single command. The Lord Chamberlain raised his staff, and the guards froze with the movement half-born in their shoulders. Steel stilled, leather hung. Breath returned to the room in one controlled draft. The prince stepped first. It looked like courtesy. It was strategy. He went down from the dais with an exact step, reached the tiny oval where it rested on the polished floor, and closed his hand around it before the Duke's glove descended that last inch. "Thank you," he said to the room, as if nothing more unusual had occurred than a misplaced lady's pin. "We shall not trouble the set any further." His fingers were cool around the locket. His pulse was not. He offered his arm to her. She set her hand there without looking at him, as if the gesture were a bridge they had already crossed in another life. He could feel her steadiness through cloth. It steadied him in turn. The Duke inclined his head, elegant and unopposed. He moved just enough to stay beside them without appearing to pursue. The master of ceremonies reclaimed his air with a careful breath. The orchestra blinked as though emerging from a deep pool. The prince did not wait for permission. He turned them toward the nearest side door, the one servants used in quiet files and dignitaries used when apologies were made in private. "Antechamber," the Lord Chamberlain murmured, relief disguised as protocol, and gestured with his staff. They passed through a wall of heat and light into a cooler corridor lined in walnut paneling. Portraits glittered with eyes that had watched other knights not so bold and not so brave. The hallway smelled of beeswax and damp wool from cloaks left in antechambers to dry. She walked at his side without shortening her stride. Her gown whispered at her ankles like long grass. Behind, the hum had already resumed. The court was a beast that fed on motion. It would move the story in circles while they were gone. It was better that it did so beyond a closed door than over her skin. The antechamber took them into its hush. A tapestry colored in faded sea blues hung along one wall. A narrow fire burned in a little grate. On a side table, a silver ewer caught the candlelight. The room's scale invited low voices and small truths. Two ladies of the bedchamber slipped in with the ease of women used to the filament of privilege. A secretary arrived with pen and sand, and the face of a man paid to absorb panic like blotting paper. The Duke stood with his back to the fire as if he owned its heat. A shadow of his profile leaned long on the paneling. The prince placed the locket on the table. It felt heavier than it had a right to be. "Set it here," he told the secretary. "You will witness." The man nodded and brought the candle closer. The oval lay in a small amber lake. The enamel had worn almost smooth, but a fragment of color remained, a hint of blue, a bleed of gold. The hinge showed years. He touched it with his thumb. "May I?" the Duke said, and did not wait for the answer that did not come. He lifted the thing as if it were nothing, there was always that risk, and let it rest again, fastidious, in the same place. His signet flashed, a stag unwinged indented on the gold. The light glanced over it, friendly to history. The prince made no note of the signet aloud. He kept his voice low and formal, and his mind on the current. "You will speak when spoken to," he said to the secretary not unkindly, "and remain otherwise as you are." The secretary touched pen to paper. "Yes, Highness." The prince glanced up at the tapestry, a shield with 3 sheaves. A stag lifted itself as if to leap, a painted wing curving above its shoulder that tradition had plucked from most modern devices. The faded threads held a story that almost did not show in the light. He let himself look for 1 extra second, because she had a right to see him see it. Her eyes were on the same wing. He drew in a quiet breath. "Are you steady?" he asked her, not moving his mouth much. "Standing," she said. It was not bravado. It was what she knew. The ladies of the bedchamber pretended a sudden interest in the silk tassels on the fire screen. They watched the girl's hands from the sides of their eyes. One of them folded her own fingers together, and then apart again without thinking. The Duke hovered a half-pace into the room with perfect domestic grace. "What a curious trinket," he said. "Strays do find their way into the most orderly of evenings." "There are few strays in this house," the prince answered. "Everything is seen by someone." "And then by everyone," the Duke said, pleasant. The prince lifted the locket's lid. The clasp gave with an old click that found the inside of his chest and pressed there. The interior showed enamel worn by touch and time, and something under that first layer that the light could not quite reach at this angle. He closed it again. He would not hunt here in front of the Duke like a man seeking treasure at the edge of a crowd. "Record the condition of the object," he told the secretary. "Oval locket," the secretary murmured, pen moving. "Enamel, worn, hinge functional. Interior, not yet examined in full." "Good," the prince said. He turned to her, and his voice softened by a degree no one else would remark. "Do you know it?" he asked. "It was sewn to the lining," she said. "By whom?" "By hands that shook," she said, and let the answer stand. Neither lie nor full admission. Her thumb pressed into her palm until a pale crescent rose there. The Duke saw everything. The man's fortune was built on observation. He watched the crescent appear and saw in it what he wished. "A poor woman's makeshift," he said lightly. "One can hardly start a court legend on such a thread." "Some threads hold," she said, not looking at him. The fire answered with a soft cough. Resin burned in it, sending a smell like pine in winter. The prince set the locket back on the table and placed his hand beside it, not touching, staking a claim without making a scene. "We will not litigate this here," he said. "We will return to the hall." "The hall is hungry," the Duke said. "You may prefer the quiet." "I do not intend to feed it the wrong meat," the prince said. The secretary's pen began to blot. He lifted it away quickly, blew sand to catch the wetness of the ink, and looked as though he wished he had been born to another trade. One of the ladies gave him a shot of sympathy from behind her trained blankness and adjusted a ring that had turned on her finger. A bell sounded down the corridor, the way the palace keeps its hours even during a storm. The next set was announced. A cotillion, a cheerful piece designed to sort faces and words quietly under the pretense of movement. "We will show the room you require no correction," the prince said. He opened his arm. She took it. The door admitted them back to the corridor. The Duke came along at the pace of a man who never has to hurry to arrive first. They re-entered the hall at the precise moment when the orchestra found the downbeat. Light swallowed them again. Heat threw its arms over their shoulders. The master of ceremonies did not announce them. He didn't need to. Heads turned. The court liked nothing better than a subject that walked back into its mouth and offered its own name. The prince led them to the top of the set. It was the place that made every gesture an order. They stood opposite one another as the figure demanded. The space between them was a stage, and the steps bid them cross it repeatedly with smiles and turns and that brief legal touch that allows a man to hold a woman's hand without a flake of scandal leaving behind. Her point of view narrowed and sharpened. The music became a surface she could stand on. She could not be sure if she felt the floor under her feet or the sound itself. Left hand to right. Pass and turn. She met his gaze on the first figure and found there the same question that had waited in the antechamber. He did not repeat it. He did not need to. She answered with the small nod that says a cart is balanced, that a load will ride true. "Courage," someone whispered behind a spray of feathers, and someone else hissed for silence. She moved like water through the familiar parts of the unfamiliar dance. A childhood had taught her to keep balance on uneven ground. This polished floor required the same logic. Do not rush the turn. Find the friend in the measure. Let the hand go at the right beat and not before. The rest would take care of itself, or it would not. There was not much one could do about that with a room watching for collapse. When the lines changed and partners exchanged, she let go of the prince and took the hand of the gentleman across from her. A cool palm, a quick bow, an automatic smile. She completed the pass and returned, the steps placing her precisely where the figure demanded she be, at the center with him. He said nothing. There was no way to speak without making speech into an act. They allowed silence to be the word that joined them. The next passage required a promenade, side by side, the couple gliding forward in agreement. She felt the air shift before she saw him. The duke slid into their path, under the color of the dance, hands clasped behind his back, the easy curve of his smile at odds with the angle of his intention. "Forgive me," he said, as if taking an extra from a plate that had already been offered. He inserted himself into her turn so surely that it looked natural. The steps permitted it. Etiquette could be a weapon or a shield. He made it both. For the span of a breath, she was his partner. He lean bowed, not with mockery, with just enough correctness to make faulting him seem petty. "Such confidence," he said softly, the words a warmth that did not reach the bone. "It must be exhausting to carry." "It weighs less than fear," she said. "Names weigh more," he murmured, "especially one you misplace on purpose." She kept her eyes level and her smile unshowy. "You sound as if you know the cost." His mouth tilted. "I know the sum." He released her hand at the exact beat, so the figure forgave the intrusion. She returned to the prince with a touch that was a degree firmer than before. He read it at once. He had been educated to read things that did not wish to be read, and had failed in most of it, except when it came to moments like this. "What did he say?" he asked, without moving his lips. "That he knows who I am," she said. "Do you care?" "Yes," she said. "Just not about him." They crossed again, and the lines reformed, the pairs opening, flourishing hands. The court watched the duke's easy entitlement and answered it with its own. It did not occur to most of them that one could refuse such a man's claim without wanting to pay for it later. She faced the duke again as the pattern brought her there. He took his time with her hand, not too long, but a fraction longer than the correct. He performed a small smile that told the room he was the sort of man who forgave rustic clumsiness because it made him feel gracious. "You've walked a long way to arrive at the wrong door," he said. "Every door is the same from the fields," she said. "They open or they do not." "This one opens on command," he said. "And I have the bell." "You will find my rope is shorter than you thought," she said. He laughed without sound. "The hall will take care of what I am not allowed to say." She looked down for the beat, then up again. "Then say it." He shook his head the smallest degree. "I have never been more certain that patience will purchase more than pride." He let her go again. The prince received her. The music did not falter. The court took the exchange into itself like wine, warming as it swallowed. "Tell me," the prince said, voice even, "if you wish the set to fail." "I do not wish to be the reason you do not keep your word," she said. "It would not be you," he said. He might have said more. The figure did not allow it. 3 steps, a turn, a touch, and away. The floor glowed back their reflections and bent them at the ankles. The chandeliers threw a light that made every stone cut its own sharp star. Her breath found a rhythm she could live with. Under the sounds of silk and bow and shoe leather, she heard the bell that would call the figure to a close. She took comfort and warning together from it. The dance provided structure enough to keep the room from cutting too deeply. It would end. Then the next thing would start. She felt it before she saw it. The way one senses a change in weather on the skin. The Duke lifted his chin a degree and turned his eyes toward the dais. The master of ceremonies, who had learned the Duke's signals out of self-preservation, received the tilt and moved within his office like a man remembering a line he had rehearsed 100 times. "Do not look," the prince said softly. She did not. She kept her focus on his face for one last turn, then on the floor, then on their joined hands as they separated and returned. The ladies along the wall stilled their fans in a perfect row. The Lord Chamberlain drew his shoulders a fraction closer together, a man bracing quietly. The secretary, somewhere near a column, realized his pen had left an ink line across his own cuff, and stared at it as if it could be undone by will. She sensed the court deciding to enjoy itself. Nothing pleases a room more than a story it thinks it knows how to end. The dance moved them apart and together again in the last crossing. The Duke positioned himself to her left within the flow of bodies, a predator unhurried, because the river will deliver the quarry to his bank. He opened his mouth. "Prepare," the prince said, and the way he said it told her he did not mean prepare to be saved. "I am already prepared," she said. The figure closed. It should have been the moment when the gentlemen bowed and the ladies curtsied, and the orchestra lifted to the next cheerful beginning. It was not. The master of ceremonies walked forward with his staff, not too fast, never that, and took the center of the floor with a practiced single step. The room tilted toward him. The music hung over a chasm and decided it could not after all span it. The master of ceremonies struck the floor with his staff and cut the music dead as the Duke stepped forward to claim the right to speak. Silence held the room on the edge of a blade. The master of ceremonies gripped his staff as if it anchored him to the floor. The Duke stood at the center with a soft smile that had soothed ministers and cut men down by halves for years without raising dust. The prince did not move. He watched calculation pass over faces like wind over wheat. Waiting was a skill. He had learned it until it looked like ease. "Your Majesties, Your Highness," the Duke said, including the dais without looking up. "To spare the court from misunderstanding, I beg leave to clarify a small matter of identity." Small. He let it sound like a favor. He turned, and a footman was there with a leather folder, hands steady, eyes unsure. The folder was smooth from use. It made the sort of soft sound that meant money had preserved it well. The prince's mouth did not change. His heart marked the beat all the same. The Duke opened the folder and held up a paper so that the front ranks could see the vicar's hand. A neat script, dates like pins in a cushion. "From the Register of St. Martin's," he said, mild. "A baptism, the name of the father and mother, tenant farmers, decent people. They deserve not to be laughed at because they are made into what they are not." He let the last words drop like a kindness. A murmur moved along the walls, relieved to be asked for kindness rather than courage. The prince lifted his gaze a fraction and met the Lord Chamberlain's eyes. The older man inclined his head very slightly. He would not contradict the Duke without cause. He would not contradict the heir without instruction. The Duke lowered the paper just enough to extract a ribbon and a wooden charm smoothed by many thumbs. A child's piece. He held it as if it were evidence enough by itself. A token from the cottage. It traveled with her. Touches of the country are sweet at harvest. In a ballroom they read as parody. He did not glance toward the girl. He did not need to. The room would do that for him. The prince stepped half a pace forward, as etiquette allowed. "You are far afield from your steward's ledger, your grace." "Forgive me," the duke said, sweeping a look that included apology and dominion in the same gesture. "Justice is the steward of reputations." The master of ceremonies had been waiting for a line he could turn into procedure. He found it now. "If there is a question of identity, the secretary will examine the paper." The secretary, who would rather have been a mile away, did what the office asked. He came forward, took the paper with care, and spread it at the edge of the dais where light fell clean. He did not pronounce. He described. "Paper of the last decade, hand neat, ink not fresh. It appears in order." Appears. He had chosen the word like a man choosing a footing on a wet step. The prince kept his hands loose at his sides. He could not reach for her. The eyes in the room would make hunger of it. He looked at her instead with the sort of regard that a court cannot pretend not to notice. It made several ladies shift their weight and several gentlemen draw breath. She stood where the figure had left her, in the center, not a step backward or forward. Her chin was not high. She did not make a show of lack of shame. She took the weight of 1,000 looks and made it seem as if she had long since learned to carry heavy. The duke continued in a tone that would have been mercy if not for the purpose under it. "No one begrudges a man generous fancies. We prize sentiment. We must, however, distinguish between poetry and law." "And between malice and care," the prince said, even. A ripple of pleasure moved through the crowd. They liked a duel where no one bled on the parquet. The Lord Chamberlain raised his staff half an inch. "Decorum will be observed." The duke smiled and bowed to the staff to show it no ill will. "Decorum is the castle we live in. Let us mind its walls." The prince could feel the room's wish to nestle back into the familiar. Order makes the air easier to breathe. He also felt an older, harder thing in himself, the bone-deep refusal to let the room decide which way the light fell. "Have you done?" he asked the duke. "For now," the duke said, because he knew how to make a question sound like his own. The prince looked at her, not to take courage, but to return it. "If you choose to speak, I will make way." She met his eyes for a heartbeat. "If I speak, it is not to them." "Then speak where it matters," he said. He stepped aside one pace. It was not abdication. It was judgment. It set a narrow, straight path between the center of the floor and the dais. She took it. A collective inhale lifted the room like a single shoulder. She did not hurry. Her hem whispered along the boards. A lady in blue swayed as if she had been struck and didn't wish to fall. A young man looked down into his cravat as if something there might tell him what to do if a world he thought he understood shifted under him. The Queen's ladies drew closer to the chair, a defense that looked like decorum. The Queen did not move. Her hands rested on the arms, rings quiet in the light. She was the stillest thing in the room and the center of it. At the base of the dais, the girl stopped and bent the knee. It was no cottage bob. It was low and clean, the exact angle that would get through any door from any age. She had learned it somewhere. The room told itself stories about where and when in the time between one breath and the next. She did not lower her head all the way. She looked up with the frankness of someone who has loved truth enough to find it inconvenient. "Your Majesty," she said. Her voice did not stumble. It carried because it was not trying to be heard by all. The first violinist, who had been holding his arm aloft so long it ached, let it settle a fraction. No one noticed but him, and he was grateful for his body's small disobedience. The candles hissed, as candles do. The Duke's smile thinned. The prince stood where she had left him. He did not look anywhere but at her. She drew the locket from her sleeve and placed it on her open palm, as if it weighed as much as a brick. She lifted it to the level of the dais. It was an offering and an accusation. It would be what the person on the chair made of it. The Lord Chamberlain's throat worked. He did not command. He could not. He did not forbid. He dared not. A herald detached from the line along the wall with the trained glide of a man whose trade is memory. He took his place beside the Queen's shoulder and bent his head to see what was shown without screening the sight from the woman who showed it. He smelled beeswax and enamel, old air in old paint. The locket was not beautiful. It had been touched too often. The hinge was softened by fingers and years. The enamel portrait within held a woman whose style belonged to a decade that had gone. It showed a slight scar near the temple where hair had once fallen differently, a detail a painter had loved or could not resist. The herald saw the winged stag at her shoulder. It was small, a painter's joke or pride. He had seen it once in a book of devices for disputes. He had thought it foolish then. He did not think so now. The chaplain at the edge of the dais, who kept the chapel registers and the smell of old vellum in his sleeve, went pale without making drama of it. He watched the locket and saw dates in the air over it like faint smoke. He did not speak. He would not without being asked. The Queen did not reach for the locket. She did not recoil. She leaned in a degree, enough to honor the risk the girl had taken by lifting it. "Rise," the Queen said. The girl rose. She did not stumble. She kept the locket leveled between palm and gaze. "Where did you find this?" the Queen asked. "In cloth meant to be mended," she said. "In whose house?" "In the house where work was given," she said, "and where work was taken away." The Queen did not move her eyes from the miniature. "Who put it there?" "A woman whose hands shook," she said, repeating the truth aloud without naming the risk, both protection and confession. The herald glanced once toward the tapestry along the wall. Even in the big room, the old winged stag could be found by anyone who knew how to look. It was a ghost of a device, retired after an argument that had stopped being spoken aloud by the time he had been hired. The Duke breathed through his nose like a man drawing the room back toward him by scent alone. "These are objects, not proofs." "Objects keep their own record," the Queen said. He bowed his head, courteous. "They also invite stories that feel like facts." "Stories carry us when facts arrive," the Queen said. "We do not walk across an empty floor without imagining the door on the other side." The prince's mouth warmed by a fraction. He did not let his features confess it. The Lord Chamberlain raised his staff just enough to reassert shape over flow. His mind was moving like a clerk's mind. How to write the minutes so that the minutes would not disgrace anyone who had to sign them. The secretary stood 3 paces back and tried to count his own pulse to calm it. He gave up at 16 and began again. The Duke drew his smile back into neutrality. He could not prevent this without making himself the man who yanked a token out of a girl's hand in front of the court. He had not built his life on such open ugliness. He moved instead to the side where influence breathes more easily. "Your Majesty," he said, voice smooth, "we live in a delicate season. The ministry leans on your house. The city watches. A certain alliance weighs." The Queen lifted a finger. It was not a reproof. It was a pause. "We do not bargain in the middle of a dance," she said. "We do not insult a woman in public by turning her into a rumor when she stands here as herself." He bowed. It took nothing and gave him time to think. The girl turned the locket so that the miniature faced the room. She did not extend it out like a relic. She let the nearest see well, and the farthest infer. She was considerate even now. It sat in her hand like a word chosen and repeated until it lost fear and became true. The prince felt pride rise in him like a tide. He pressed it down. Pride is wild. It tips the balance. What she needed was steadiness, and he would be that, even if it meant he had to look like stone. The master of ceremonies held his staff in both hands and felt how small it was in a storm. The first violinist found a comfortable ache in his shoulder. and decided he preferred it to dropping his bow at the Queen's feet. "Who painted this?" the Queen asked, to no one, to the air, to the locket. "No one whose name I know," the girl said. The chaplain closed his eyes once, opened them, and saw the calendar of years printed behind his eyelids. Rain had fallen in a certain spring. Ink had run, then stopped. A line had changed hands. He said nothing. The Duke let silence draw out until the room wanted him to speak again. People like to be told where they are. He provided the suggestion. "Even if a lady gave a maid a picture," he said, gentle, "even if a token was hidden in a hem, even if a trinket traveled, that does not make a birth into a throne. Nor does it turn a woman into a lie," the Queen said. A flutter of breath across the hall told its own story. Some had feared the Queen would humiliate the girl to preserve the room. Others had feared she would throw the room to the wolves to save an unworthy cause. Neither fear found a home in that sentence. The Duke recalculated, and the calculation showed only in the quiet between his inhale and exhale. The prince stepped forward one pace and spoke in a voice that reached the galleries and stayed gentle. "No one is treading on law. We are treading on evening. The court will not be made into a knife." He looked at her. His eyes said more than the sentence. The air between them taught the room what it meant to choose. "Do you regret it?" he said, for her only. "No," she said. Her hands did not shake. She let the locket close. The click traveled like a single bead rolling on wood. She did something then that no tutor would have taught. She placed the locket flat on the edge of the dais, within easy reach of the Queen, but not pushing beyond that reach. A gift, not an invasion. A plea, not a demand. The line mattered. She knew it. A hush more complete than the last rolled out from the dais like cool water. The Queen put one ringed hand on the arm of the chair and leaned forward a fraction. Her gaze landed on the little hinge, as if it were a hinge on the door between rooms. The herald, his memory whirring quietly, breathed the words, "winged stag," behind his teeth. He had seen it in the old armorial before it had been corrected. The correction had left a stain he had not bothered to name. He named it now in the ledger of his mind. The Duke watched the room tip. He did not push. He had learned not to show force when a feather would turn the scale. He looked past the girl to the prince and let a look pass that promised future pressures and present restraint. The Lord Chamberlain took one small step back to stand directly under the canopy's edge. He would need to marshal this into a form. He began to make columns in his head. The secretary pressed the point of his pen into the fold of his cuff until it marked the cloth, a stain to explain later. A faint draft moved across the hall and made several candles shiver. The flames drew thin and steady again. The smell of hot wax hung lower. Somewhere a lace flounce tickled a wrist and was restrained with dignity. The Queen touched the locket with one finger, the way a person tests the heat at a hearth. Her finger did not burn. She lifted her hand and did not take the locket. She let the finger rest on the air above it. "Call the herald," she said, though he was already there. "I am here," he said. "Speak to what you know," she said. He did not clear his throat. "Your Majesty, that device appeared on certain items in the older rooms and in the small chapel window before the glass was replaced. It is an earlier state of the arms." "Earlier," the Duke repeated, bland, as if the word smelled like damp. "Not false," the herald said. He bowed his head as if apologizing to the word for using it in such a crowd. The chaplain stood as if he might be asked and did not seek the safety of the background. The prince did not take his eyes from the Queen. The girl felt the room's weight lift off her shoulders and settle somewhere else. She did not know where. She was careful not to assume it settled on his. She stood within herself, doing the simplest human work, breathing without becoming loud. The master of ceremonies bent his head and whispered to the Lord Chamberlain, who answered without moving his lips. The Duke folded his hands behind his back. He looked like a man taking the air on a pleasant morning. His mind moved like a blade kept in oil. "Your Majesty," he said, tone grateful. We have been entertained and moved. What remains is to protect the evening from dissolving into a fairy tale where the wine turns back into grapes." The Queen did not correct him. She did not agree with him. She kept her eyes on the girl. "What is your name?" she asked. The answer had been on the tip of the girl's tongue since childhood. It was not a name the court would choose. It was what she had. She gave it. The Queen inclined her head, remembering it with the kind of attention that turns a thing into a stone in a wall. "Thank you," the Queen said. The words fell with a different weight than praise. They were acknowledgement. They were also warning. Nothing beyond this moment was promised. The prince drew a long, slow breath. He let it out as if the air itself might break if it came too fast. "Is the evening to be spared?" the Duke asked, the question smooth as cream. The orchestra stood like men in a painting. Several fans were closed at once. The room sounded suddenly like a brace of birds when a bush is shaken. She kept her gaze on the Queen. She did not look to the prince. She had the feeling of a person on a narrow bridge between two banks, who knows that looking to the side is a way to fall. The Queen raised her hand, an inch only, a preface without a word, and the guards at the base of the dais shifted their weight together, leaving the court uncertain whether the next motion would summon protection for the kneeling girl or demand her removal for presumption. The raised hand became instruction, not judgment. The Queen's fingers did not point to the guards. She turned her wrist toward the Lord Chamberlain and angled two knuckles toward the screened door that led to the private gallery above the ballroom. The prince understood at once. He stepped to the girl's side, not in shelter, but in clear company. "Clear the way," the Lord Chamberlain said, relief hidden inside formality. His staff lifted. A path opened as if the parquet itself had parted. Heat and light fell away as they crossed the threshold. The corridor beyond was narrow, walnut-paneled, lined with portraits whose eyes had watched quieter scandals. Beeswax, old wood, and the faint iron tang of extinguished sconces met the lungs like calmer air. Behind them, the court found a new hum to occupy its nerves. He felt her presence before he felt the cool. Her hand at his sleeve was steady. The weight of her steadiness did something to his own balance. He placed it where resolve belonged, and held it there. The Duke came without being asked. He had no need to be summoned where conflict lived. The herald detached himself from the wall like a piece of carved furniture suddenly admitted to motion. The chaplain, white hair at the temples, moved more quickly than his years suggested, the chapel's keys in one hand. A secretary kept pace with his pen and his silence. They passed through a small anteroom hung with a tapestry in faded sea blues. A silver ewer sat on a side table, engraved with a stag that hinted wings with the curl of its line. A narrow flight of steps lifted them to the gallery that overlooked the ballroom through a carved lattice. The music below, resumed out of habit, reached them as a muted thread. The gallery's candles had been trimmed. The flames stood like fine needles, unflustered. The Queen's chair waited, less formal than the canopy below, but no less final. In this room, voices wore their proper size. The prince did not sit. He set the locket on a small table where the Queen could see without having to receive. The oval looked smaller here, its scratches sharper. "Witness," he said to the secretary. "Yes, Highness," the man answered, placing paper, sand, and seal on the table. He would inscribe without deciding. The Duke took up position near the hearth, a picture of domestic gravity. He clasped his hands behind his back, a man at home in every room. The Queen nodded to the herald without looking away from the locket. "Tell me what I am looking at," she said. "A locket, Your Majesty," the herald said, voice pitched to serve precision, not drama. "Enamel, early in the last reign by the hand. The miniature within appears, if it is as it looks, to be of the Viscountess, whose portrait hangs in the west corridor. The device with the stag, the wing, was used long ago. It has since been amended." The chaplain cleared his throat. "I will fetch the register," he said, and did not wait for assent as he went to the gallery door and sent a runner down the stair with quick instructions. He remained where he was, as if his presence kept the room from losing the thread. The prince's attention nested inside the simplest details, the ring of candlelight around the locket, the shadow of the lattice draped like lace over the floor, the way her breathing did not quicken. He held to those and did not look at the future. "Open it," the queen said. He lifted the lid. The hinge gave its small, faithful sound. The miniature looked back at them with the gaze of an earlier decade. A careful face, a scar on the temple that a painter had either loved or could not ignore. The curl of paint that made the stag's wing was almost hidden by shadow. "She carried this," the queen said. "Yes," the prince said. "From where?" the queen asked, not unkind. The girl's answer was quiet. "From a seam," she said. In a dress given when work was taken. The duke's mouth arranged itself into sympathy. "The poor repay kindness with stories," he said, gentle. "Do not confuse need with invention," the prince said. The queen shifted her attention to the girl. A change happened in the air, a lessening of height without any loss of rank. "Step nearer," the queen said. She stepped. The gallery smelled of beeswax and vellum, and beneath it, of cold stone that remembers winter. She saw the miniature clearly now. The scar glinted where the painter had let light catch it. A younger version of the woman in the corridor. A version that did not know how her story would end. She felt something in her chest both loosen and brace. "Tell me what you know," the queen said. Not a trap, an invitation. "I know that a woman with shaking hands sewed a thing she valued into a hem she trusted," the girl said. "I know I was told once that a baby can be recorded wrongly when the night runs fast and the ink runs faster. I know I had no word to bring here but this." The queen did not blink at the hint of recording gone wrong. She looked to the chaplain. "A birth," the chaplain said, already seeing it. "A burial. The same week. A hand that changed." He waited for the runner like a man who can hear the footsteps before they arrive. The duke spoke as if he was saving them time. "We all know families who bury hope with children. We do not turn candles into stars because we like how they look." The herald's eyes flicked to the tapestry in the antechamber through the open door. "The wing appears in older items," he said. "It is not fashionable now, but fashion is not law." The queen returned her gaze to the girl. "You have not lied to me. I do not yet know what else you have done." "I have stood," the girl said. "Yes," the queen said. "You have." Down below, the orchestra kept to a quiet figure, the sound thin, the court pretending it understood what to do with its hands when not clapping. The runner returned, breathing quickly, face colored with the speed. He held out a calf-bound volume. The chaplain took it tenderly and laid it on the table, the locket beside it like a punctuation mark. The chaplain opened to a year without needing to be told which one. His finger ran along cramped lines written by many hands. He stopped. He read once to himself, then again, lips barely moving. "A baptism," he said. "Female infant. Names that I recognize. Godparents of rank. The ink smudged by damp. And, later in the week, a burial of an infant girl. The hand differs by 3 lines. The parish was full from fever. The clerk may have changed mid-week." He did not pronounce judgment. He placed the facts on the air where anyone could see them if they chose. The duke's smile tidied itself. "Busy weeks reorder many books," he said. "We cannot rescue every confusion from the past and call it a design." The queen glanced at the prince. Behind all this, a second weight pressed. The ministry. The promised understanding with a powerful family. Stability was not a small word hung like a tassel from a chair. It was the chair itself. "What you intend among these people has its own cost," she said to her son, plain. He did not feign ignorance to ease himself. "I know it." "Do you know all of it?" she asked. "I know enough to decide to bear it," he said. He reached into his coat and brought out a paper folded twice. He placed it near the seal, not opening it. The secretary leaned forward with a professional flinch that he could not stop. "Do not," the Queen said. "I am not signing it," the Prince said. "Not tonight." The Duke did not move. He did not need to ask what paper it was. The unsaid title hovered over it, patient and solid. "You throw open windows in December," the Duke said, softly to the air. "You call it fresh, and let the fire do the work." "Better that than stale air that suffocates," the Prince said. The Queen's expression did not change. She had survived many seasons. Her mind moved not slower than the men's, nor quicker, but with different rhythm. "We will not pronounce tonight," she said. "We will begin something and endure the day it creates." Hands loosened in the room that had been clenched without knowing it. The secretary let out breath he had been counting badly. The herald let go a word he had been holding for a decade. "At first light," the Queen said to the chaplain, "you will send a messenger to the parish named so we may see the register with our own eyes and ask the vicar for the circumstances of those entries. If any who served in that house live, we will ask them to speak. If they do not, we will look at what they left." "Yes, Your Majesty," the chaplain said. "To the herald," the Queen said, "you will brush the dust off your old books and bring me what the armorial once was and what it became and why." "Yes, Your Majesty," he said. "To the secretary," she said, "you will write what has been done and nothing we have not done. No speculation will enter the minutes." "Yes, Your Majesty," he said, grateful to be given a narrow lane. The Prince felt the decision in his bones. It did not rescue him from consequence. It did not give him what he wanted. It gave him a way to stand until morning. That can be as much as a man needs. The girl caught his gaze. She saw no triumph there. She saw something steadier. It comforted and warned at once. "Do you wish to speak to me alone?" the Queen asked the girl. The girl looked once to the Prince, then back. "If I do, I will not say anything different," she said. The Queen's mouth softened by the smallest amount. "Then I will ask you only this. Will you carry yourself as you have carried yourself now when we go back down?" "Yes," the girl said. "And will you do it if they laugh again?" the Queen said. "Yes," the girl said. "And will you do it if they do not?" the Queen said, a different challenge. The girl paused. "Yes," she said. "Perhaps that is harder." The Queen touched the locket with one finger, then lifted her hand away from it, as if the air above it had become heavier. "You will leave this with me tonight," she said. "It will be returned when its work for this house is done." The girl nodded. The locket had never been hers in any sense the court would recognize. It had been a weight and a promise. It could now be both on a table she could not touch. The Duke turned his head toward the lattice to watch the dance below thread itself into a timid figure. He could imagine the stories being minted even as they breathed in the bright air. He swallowed his appetite for the moment. There would be other moments. He would press where men press when they do not wish to be seen pressing. "We must not keep them long," the Queen said. "A crowd left to its own mind breeds 1,000 more." The Prince inclined his head. "Then we will give them what is true and leave off what is not." "You will not snatch victory from the middle of a night," the Queen said. "I will not," he said. "You will also not apologize for standing," she said. He bowed to her, not as a son to a mother, but as an heir to a sovereign whose instructions saved him from mistakes. He turned toward the door. The girl moved with him. The secretary gathered his papers like a man catching snowflakes he means to weigh. The chaplain closed the register with a hand that did not tremble, now that it had done something it could justify. The herald tucked his words back into his mind and took the ability to deploy them with him. The Duke smoothed his sleeve and made no attempt to get ahead of anyone on the narrow stair. They entered the anteroom, where the tapestry's faded sea put a cool blue on the wood. The Prince paused half a pace, so that the girl could go forward with him side by side, not behind. "Say what you wish me to hear now," he said, voice low enough to persist only between the two of them. She looked at the threads of the sea, at the winged curve in the old device, and then at him. I do not know the whole of myself, she said. I know that I was not born only where they would place me. If that is a sin here, then I ask you to be clear with me on the price. He could have said many things. He chose the smallest that could hold the most. The price is me, he said. Taken as I am, given as I am not allowed. She heard the dangerous comfort in it, and did not take more than it could hold. Then do not promise what you cannot keep, she said. I have not, he said. She nodded. The ribbon that secured the wildflower at her nape had loosened by a fraction in the heat of the ballroom. She did not reach back to fix it. He saw it and let himself want to tie it for her. He kept his hands at his sides. They descended the short stair from the gallery with steps that matched without intention. The Lord Chamberlain waited at the bottom, staff in hand, posture relieved to receive instruction. You will announce, the Queen told him, that a matter has been submitted to the inquiry proper to it. You will say that I have accepted custody of an object that belongs to the house. You will say the court will return to its dance. You will not say more. Yes, Your Majesty, he said, glad for words to fit into his mouth. The Master of Ceremonies, summoned by a tilt of the staff through the lattice, had ordered the orchestra to prepare for silence again. The men had set their bows down and were massaging fingers. When the canopy stirred, they retrieved composure, as if it had never left them. The Queen did not lead. She allowed herself to be seen. She let the court take from her calm what it could and make of it whatever it needed. She took her place under the canopy without raising a hand or a fan. The herald stood 2 paces behind. The chaplain held his book like a shield that did not look like one. The Lord Chamberlain struck his staff once. The sound went up to the chandeliers and returned without echo. By Her Majesty's word, he said, a matter that concerns this house will be examined as is proper to it. An object has been received. The night will go forward. There was a murmur, but it had no teeth. The court learned quickly which parts of its appetite to put away when told. The prince stepped into the space that remained and did not turn his head to search for the proper phrase. He had done that all his life. It had not brought him here. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice level, we are guests of a house that is not afraid to know itself. I thank you for your patience. I ask you to extend it to morning. He stood aside so that the request would not look like an order made only by rank. He wanted it to be an order made by sense. People obey better when they can pretend it was their idea. The Duke applauded once, twice, with the exact irony that would not stick to his gloves later. The room found it easier to clap than to think. It clapped. The prince offered his arm to the girl. He did it in the very center where every eye already rested. He did not do it as if it were victory. He did it as if it were natural. She took it. She did not hurry. The line of her neck remained long even under heat and gaze. The wildflower at her nape held its green. The orchestra raised their bows. The first notes were not the grand set. They were smaller, and that made them braver. A country measure softened to palace shape, respectful to both. Are you ready? He asked, just for her. You already know the answer, she said. He smiled then, a little, not to charm the room, to let her see the person inside the posture. They moved to the edge of the floor where the figure would place them without forcing. A small space like a held breath opened around them. Others took their places farther down the set, grateful to have something for their hands and feet to do that did not involve deciding. He did not press her hand. He did not let it go too soon. She adjusted her waiter hair to compensate for the boards that bowed a little there after years of dancing. It looked like grace. It was work. The bow from the orchestra floated in and settled. The court tilted toward a gentler attention. The worst had not happened. The best had not either. The middle, for once, was not a coward's choice, but a preparation. In the corner of his eye, the prince saw the gallery's lattice and the dark beyond it where the locket lay. He allowed himself one wish as a man, not as a prince, that when morning came, facts would not be the enemy of what he knew now without proof. He stored the wish like a coin in a pocket to be remembered later, and not shown. "Begin," the master of ceremonies said softly to the orchestra. The first note came and they stepped, not away from what waited, but toward it, shoulders level, eyes forward, in a room made bright again by the simple bravery of choosing to keep going. The first notes unspooled like thread, fragile and sure. The hall accepted them because it needed something to hold. Hands found their places. Bodies remembered what to do when minds were crowded. He stood at the head of the set with her. The privilege of position did not loosen its grip. It became a promise instead. He felt the gaze of the court like weather on his skin. He set his jaw to measure, not to stubbornness. He would give this room a shape it could live with, and he would put her inside it, as if she had always been there. "Breathe," he said, soft enough to keep between them. "I am," she said. He watched her breath settle under the muslin. He watched the wildflower at her nape hold its green under the heat. The figure began simply. Step, turn, hands pass and let go. He found he could move without counting, the music carrying the mathematics for him. She moved beside him like a person who did not ask permission to exist. That steadied his own existence in a place that often made his shape feel borrowed. Across the floor the Duke floated where he wished to be. He did not push. He waited. The Queen's chair under the canopy held the center of gravity without forcing the hall to bow to it every second. The Lord Chamberlain's staff hovered near its niche in the world. The herald's face had the attentive blankness of a man who remembers too much at once. He chose his moment as the figure turned back to him, as her hand came and then left, and then returned. The music gathered itself at the end of the phrase. He lifted his head. He did not raise a hand or a voice. He used the weight that was his to use, careful of it. "Master," he said, clear enough to reach the man whose life was to hear such calls. The master of ceremonies bent unseen and rose, like a hinge. "At your pleasure, Highness," he said. "Not mine," he said. "The room's." A tiny smile in a corner of the master's mouth admitted gratitude for a prince who had learned how to make commands sound like gifts. He turned his head toward the orchestra. "A country measure," he said. "The old one. The one that suits a floor like this and a field like that." He nodded toward the gleam of parquet as if it were grass. The first violinist blinked. He had learned to adapt. He put his bow to the string and called the tune. It was gentler than the grand pieces, less showy, more honest about where it came from. He saw the prince's mouth move once and read the word "thank you." He found himself glad to be thanked on a night like this. Several gentlemen allowed their hands to loosen at the thought of a simpler figure. Several ladies allowed their smiles to be less entrained. The Duke's lips parted, as if to object, and then closed. He was not fool enough to argue with a dance. The prince looked at her properly now. "Will you stand with me at the head?" he asked, as if the whole night had not already made that true. "Do you intend to leave me anywhere else?" she said. "No," he said. He took her hand. He did not press. He did not announce. He let the taking be the announcement. The line formed behind them with a ripple of silk, and together they set the figure in motion. The step was simple. It built a feeling of neighbors even among people who rarely deserved the word. Hands touched and released in sight of everyone. The distance that had ruined so many evenings shrank and made room for a breath. He did not look toward the gallery where the locket sat on a table out of his reach. He refused to take the future's bait. He watched her instead. He let the room watch him watching her. If he could not sign a paper tonight, he could sign this with the way he held his head and the way he offered his hand at every turn. "You're making a choice they can refuse only by refusing themselves," she said, plain. "I am making a choice they will call expensive," he said. "Can you pay it?" she asked. "With my name," he said, "and with the part of me that belongs to no one else." "That is a high price," she said. "It is my fortune," he said. She did not smile. She registered the weight, and did not let it flatten her. "Do not fling your fortune like bread," she said. "You may need it to make a meal." "I have lived a long time on air," he said. "Let me eat." The line turned them away, and then returned them to the front again. The court watched and learned how to disguise its curiosity as pleasure. Now she saw what he meant to do. He did not plan to speak a grand sentence. He would let a room trained in grammar see what a subject and a verb could do without adjectives. She felt a trembling in her fingers she had not noticed until the music made them move. She was not a person who trembled from fear. She trembled from standing under a weight she had never attempted to lift before. She could lift this. She settled the tremor by tightening her grip on the present. "Look at me," he said. She did. The steps required it then, anyway. "Face your partner, nod, walk forward, take hands." She took his hands. They were dry, warm, and held to what they held. "What do you think of these people?" he asked, as if they had time for a survey. "They are like weather," she said. "They will be cruel, and then sun for an hour, as if they had not been cruel. They will tell you their change means they meant well all along." "What do you think of me?" he asked. "Ridiculous, necessary." "I think you have understood me more quickly than is safe," she said. "I am tired of safe," he said. She let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it dared to live longer. "Safe would have been easier for you." "You are easier for me," he said. She understood the sentence in the way that mattered. He was not saying she made his life soft. He was saying she made it plain. Plainness can be a blessing in a house where meaning gets lost in curtains. The music turned them, so that the court became a blur beyond his shoulder, and then sharpened again. The Queen's face stayed contained. She did not sway the court with obvious favor. She did not need to. The court began to behave, all on its own, like a place that might be worthy of the girl it had tried to cast out, if only for the time it took to stop against a thought. The Duke moved toward the margin nearest the dais, patient. If he could not write the ending, he would at least be present at the punctuation. The figure called for a small courtesy and a walk of 3 steps. He did not bow in the old style. He bowed the way a man bows when he means it. She answered with a curtsy that gave nothing away and gave everything at once. The pair behind them mirrored it, not badly. Good habits ripple when they are seen. He took a breath and made a small choice that would carry a large meaning. He released her hand, lifted it again, and held it at the height and angle that told every person present the story he was telling. My first partner. My chosen in the set. The woman whose mistakes I will make my own. He felt a hush under the sound of bows on strings. It was almost awe. That was dangerous. Awe becomes a demand. He did not want worship. He wanted recognition. "Give me your hand again," he said low. She gave it. He turned his palm up. He did not know if he had time for a sentence. He made a motion instead. "May I ask for your token?" he said. "Not to display, but to carry tonight." Her hand moved without asking permission from her mind. She reached behind her head, where the wildflower had been pinned all night. The ribbon had loosened. She found the stem with her fingers and drew it out. Her scalp felt suddenly bare under the heat. A whisper of cool touched the back of her neck. She did not look to the room. She set the humble flower in his open palm. It did not look like much there. It looked like everything. Gasps sound the same in palaces and in barns. The human throat has only so many ways to tell the world it has seen something it did not expect to love. Several ladies swallowed down their gasps and turned them into gestures with their fans. Several gentlemen checked their cravats with sudden interest in order to look away. The Duke lifted his eyebrows a degree. He had thought the prince would beg for respect or declare a thunder. He had not planned for a man to ask for a field blossom. The Queen's eyes softened in a way that almost no one noticed, because almost no one watched her and saw softness as a state she possessed. The herald's mouth moved around an old line of poetry without setting it free. The prince closed his fingers over the flower. He did not raise his hand to show it. He brought it to his heart in a motion so small that only those nearest could be sure what they saw. "Thank you," he said, as if she had given him a country. "Do not waste it," she said. "Never," he said. He kept the flower where the beating under his ribs could press a mark into its stem. It was an act completely out of proportion with its size and exactly right for the night. The figure drew to its last passages. They completed them without racing forward to reach a conclusion. He wanted to honor what she had made possible. Calm, not haste. He would not break it by trying to win too quickly in a room that feared being asked to change. As the final chord trembled along the bow hairs, he turned and addressed the room. He did not turn his back on her to do it. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, not loud, not humble. "I ask your company for one more set tonight. We will dance this measure again. We will do it with the same partners, in the same places. If you do not wish to, you may stand and watch. But I ask you to witness us treating constancy as if it were fashionable." It was a jest and a challenge. Laughter answered it, not cruel, surprised. The Duke's smile admitted, briefly, admiration for the technique. The Lord Chamberlain's shoulders released the breath they had been holding for him since the first announcement. "Again," the Master of Ceremonies said, blessed to speak a word that made sense to everyone. The orchestra lifted their bows. Music returned like a second chance, arriving exactly on time. She felt the new set drop into the groove of the old. She felt the room choose to remain with them rather than shift to gossip's fever. That choice mattered more than some signatures she could imagine. A hall that chose to stay still enough for two people to make a life between them without being heckled by 1,000 small hands. That was a miracle this house could manage without breaking a law. "Are you afraid?" he asked her as the steps took them forward and away and together again. "Yes," she said, "but not of them." "Of what then?" he asked. "Of wanting," she said, "and of having to live with it." He felt the truth of that settle on him like a good cloak. "Then we will do the simplest thing," he said. "We will keep wanting, even when it hurts." "That is not what a prince is taught," she said. "It is what a man can learn," he said. He meant it. She heard that he meant it. She let herself lean into that thin plank of safety. At the second set's end, he did something most would remember as if they had suggested it. He did not ask the court for applause. He turned to the Queen and bowed the bow of a man who had received permission and used it well. He then turned to the Duke, of all people, and inclined his head by a hair. "Thank you for reminding me that poetry is useless without law," he said, enough for the Duke to hear and enough for the nearest 6 to repeat accurately. "And that law dies without poetry." The Duke's eyes flashed. He bowed back because he was not a fool. "May you keep both," he said. "If you can." "I intend to," he said. He felt his left hand lower, the one that held the wildflower against his chest. He would not pocket it like a thief. He would not drop it like a boy who forgets his toys. He took her wrist, gently, publicly, as one takes a hand before a dance, and slid the flower into the ribbon there, tucking it neatly so that the head lay against her pulse. The room laid its breath on the moment. There was no way to miss what it meant. He had taken her token and returned it, not as a thing to be kept safe in a pocket, but as a sign both could see. It bound him to her in a loop that needed neither ring nor priest to be clear at a glance. "Will you keep it?" he asked. "I have carried worse things," she said, and smiled then, an actual smile that lit the corner of her mouth before she allowed the room to have it. "I will keep this." The Queen stood. She did it without announcement, a small movement that moved everything else. The court bent in a wave, and when it rose, it had new eyes. "Music," she said, and the single word made the orchestra a braver creature. They began a gentle strain meant to ease a hall down from decision into movement. The Lord Chamberlain signaled for air. Doors on one side of the hall were set ajar. A thread of colder night slid in, carrying the smell of stone and distant water over wax and silk. The candles bent their flames and then found their height again. The ceiling glittered as if stars had thought to live indoors once more. The Duke made a choice of his own. He did not stay to press. He offered the Queen a bow, and the room a smile, and went to stand near a pillar where the shadows were kind to people who retreat with grace. He would not be destroyed tonight. He would be altered. It would have to do. The herald removed his hand from the memory of the winged stag and let his mind return to its ordinary shape. The chaplain placed the register on a side table, waiting for morning's messenger. The secretary wrote one sentence and then another, and kept forgetting to breathe until he noticed the edge of his pen had left dots where there should have been none. The prince looked at the entrance to the gallery and did not break his own rule. He stayed here. He would finish what he started before he walked up those stairs again in daylight. "Will you walk?" he asked her. "Yes," she said. They left the head of the set. No one closed in. A path opened as if they carried a light that made darkness polite. They walked the length of the hall, not fast, not slow. They could feel the court pivot around them, faces following, voices softening the way a church softens when two people step into a place where vows are made. No vows here, only a man and a woman practicing the posture that would make vows, if ever allowed, a continuation rather than a performance. At the far end, they paused near the windows where the leaded panes were beginning to lose their black. The light outside was not yet dawn, only the hint of it. It made a grey that did no one any favors and told the truth about distance. He stood with his shoulder a breath from hers. He did not look at her. He looked as she looked outward. "What do you see?" he asked. "Enough," she said. "A road and a door." "I see the same," he said. "You see a crowd too," she said. "Yes," he said. "But I see them smaller than I did." "What do they see?" she asked. "Us," he said, "and they will see themselves, if they can bear it." She turned her head then, just enough to see his profile. The night had carved it into a more honest line. He was not beautiful. He was beloved. It was not a thing she had thought she would feel. It surprised her and did not frighten her. "You have carried me farther than I thought a man like you would," she said. "Say my name," he said, not as a prince, as a person worried the world would take it from him and replace it with a title. She did. It sounded like home spoken in a field at night, where no one hears but the one who needs to. He closed his eyes for one beat and opened them. "You see why I will not let go. You have not taken hold yet," she said. He reached and, for the first time all night, put his hand over hers, not as a partner in a figure, not as a gesture for a room, but as a claim that expected an answer. "May I?" he said. "Yes," she said. He held. He did not squeeze. He let the warmth move across the small bridge of their joined hands the way water moves under a span built without plans, only with need. They breathed there until the room began to breathe the same time. It is possible for a room to learn a new rhythm. It is possible for a court to soften its jaw for a minute and see a future it had not approved in committee. He turned with her then and led her back toward the center where decisions look less like shadows and more like architecture. The orchestra altered the tune because it had learned something too. The first violinist lifted his bow with a feeling he had not expected to feel in a palace. "Once more," the master of ceremonies said, not to them, to himself, to the night. "Once more," the prince said, and his voice made the words into a prayer that did not need a chapel to be heard. They took their places. He glanced at the queen. She met his eyes and did not take them away. He glanced at the duke. The man's gaze slid off him like water off oil. He didn't mind. It made the room easier to hold. He looked at her and let the rest go. "With me," he said. "With you," she said. They began. The wildflower brushed her pulse with every movement, light as breath, stubborn as roots, a promise on the skin where the body tells the truth. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.